Welcome, viewers, to this, the third and concluding webinar of the Decarbonization series, An Alberta Perspective. In the earlier episodes, we explored the global energy economy and the objective of the decarbonization of energy. We then reviewed various emerging technologies addressing climate change. Today, our objective is to formulate a pathway to sustainability, that is, actions for achieving the delicate balance between energy fueling the economy and the environment. Our moderator will be Jim Carter. Jim has extensive corporate management and board governance experience in the energy sector. He's well aware of the issues and options for addressing climate change without gutting the energy industry on which the economy depends, not just here in Alberta, not just Canada, but the world economy. Jim and the three presenters bring a balanced perspective to the task of recommending a pathway to sustainability for accommodating the often conflicting energy, economic, and environmental objectives.
It's my pleasure to be the moderator of today's webinar panel discussion on this important topic. And as Perry has noted, this is the third and final panel of the series, and it's entitled Energy Transition, the Pathway to Energy and Economic Sustainability. Now, I will set the stage for today's discussion with a few opening remarks. Before COVID-19, the world in 2019 was consuming 101 million barrels of oil per day. And then, of course, in 2020, that declined significantly because of COVID-19. But in 2021, as we progressed through the year, we were almost back to the 100 million barrels per day run rate, without a significant amount of airline travel, I might add, when the Omicron variant temporarily slowed things down a bit. So, after 19, we dipped down in 20, and then we came back up in 21. Now, when I think of a world that we live in today with 7.6 billion people, and one where it is likely to grow to 10 billion people by just about any report that you read on that subject, I believe we're going to need all of the forms of energy that technology can offer. Now, that does not mean that we should not evolve to cleaner forms of energy. We ought to go all out on that, which also entails making our current forms of energy cleaner, as well as developing renewables. Unfortunately, the broader discussion has pitted one against the other as an either-or situation, instead of one and the other, which is the kind of thinking that I think we need to instill if we are going to have success in lowering carbon emissions while at the same time continuing with affordable and reliable energy. Now, in this great country of ours, we've been bestowed with tremendous natural resources that supply energy. The oil sands, which took years to develop, but which are now a huge economic engine for the Canadian economy, is an example of that. Of the 3.8 million barrels of crude oil produced per day in Canada now, 86% of it comes from the oil sands. We have abundant natural gas. And I should just say there, by the way, if we hadn't developed the oil sands, we're the third largest crude oil reserves in the world. If we hadn't developed the oil sands, Alberta would be producing about 1 million barrels a day. We'd be a marginal player at best on the world scene. We're now the fifth largest producer of crude oil as a country in the world, and we have the third largest reserves. So the development of the oil sands and the importance of it should not be understated. We have abundant natural gas in the Montney field in Alberta, BC. And in fact, Canada has 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, compared to the US that has 800 trillion. So there's a tremendous opportunity for LNG to replace coal-fired power in developing countries. And we have great hydroelectric resources in BC and Manitoba and Quebec and Labrador. And we have huge uranium deposits in northern Saskatchewan. Now, having been bestowed this abundance of natural resources, I believe it is incumbent on us as a nation to take a broader global view to enabling the world to have a pathway to energy and economic sustainability. Now, by doing this, we will have a much more positive impact on reducing CO2 emissions globally than we can by being parochial about it and simply slashing our own CO2 emissions, which as a country are about 1.5% of total global emissions. I believe that renewables have a big place in our future, and with the technology that we have developed, and applied in the hydrocarbon energy space as an example, we should be able to excel in renewables. And we don't give a lot of airtime to some of the things that we've developed in this country on the conventional drilling space, things like directional drilling. Everybody thinks it was invented in Houston. Well, it was invented with a combination of effort from Alberta and Houston. And the technology there is just advancing very much and really helping the production of conventional oil. It is important, though, to remember that renewables have the ability to impact electricity, which really only accounts for about 19% of total energy consumption today. The other 80% comes from hydrocarbons, which, by the way, is about the same as it was 30 years ago. So as we think about renewables, they can impact electricity generation, but it's kind of limited to that at this point. Renewable contribution, however, could increase with green hydrogen through electrolysis of water. But that will be a very expensive form of energy, at least in the near term. However, this can be helped by making blue hydrogen as a first step learning opportunity on the path forward, using our hydrocarbon knowledge and capability. We should just think about that for a moment. We know lots about making hydrogen in Alberta, since we make huge volumes of it to process heavy oils into lighter, cleaner products, both in our upgraders and in the refineries that we operate. We also have the pore space available in depleted oil reservoirs, where we have a deep understanding of the geology that can be used for carbon capture and sequestration. All of the components that we need to do carbon capture and sequestration are already in operation in different forms in Alberta as we speak. And in fact, we now have a successful combination of all of those in the form of the Quest project at the Shell upgrader and refinery in Fort Saskatchewan. And by the way, that was really born out of the contribution that Ed Stelmach, the commitment that he made to $2 billion to undertake letting Alberta be the leader in carbon capture and sequestration. And we shouldn't forget that. There's a real opportunity in all of that. Now, Hal Quisley in his in webinar number 1, which was moderated by Eric Newell, who is with us today. That's great, Eric, that you're here. And Hal talked about the huge potential for LNG that BC and Alberta have by jointly developing the Montney gas field. This LNG could be displacing the many coal-fired power plants being planned for China and India, making a large contribution to overall global emissions. And let me just make a point here. 10 years ago, Canada did not have an LNG economy at all. We weren't doing any LNG, and neither was the US. They didn't have any either 10 or 11 years ago. Today, when you look at it, the US now has 20% of the world LNG market, of about 50 million tons a year of LNG that's shipped today. 20% of it comes out of the US. We are still at zero, even though they're trying to chill it in Louisiana, which is a whole lot harder to do with their ambient temperature than it is for us to do in Kitimat. And of course, we're building the Canada LNG facility, and it will come online, but it's a little bit of a reflection of how long it seems to take us to get things done relative to others that we compete with. Now, in order for all of these opportunities to be properly sorted and acted upon in Canada, I believe that we need a Canadian industrial strategy that involves the federal government and the provinces. And when I say provinces, I mean all of the provinces, not just the 2 that are most likely to determine the election output at the federal level. And it needs to include preserving the economy while reducing global CO2 emissions, properly supported by well thought out public policy and an efficient regulatory process. And I believe this should be accomplished by working with Indigenous communities to their mutual socioeconomic advantage in streamlining the regulatory approval process. I think I spent 40 years along with Eric here working with the Indigenous people in this country. And I believe that if the right conversations were had with the right people, that we could encourage them to be full participants in the opportunities that might be here. I don't believe that that's been really done very well on this to this point. The path forward, by and large, will be determined by economics. And as a country, we need to set ourselves up for success by being productive, efficient, and reliable, while being leaders in environmental performance. And I think we can do all of that if we set ourselves up for success with the proper plan and the right approach to it. One of the issues that we're dealing with here is that we never really did have the right level of conversation about man-made CO2 and its contribution to global warming. We did not settle the science.
Correct.
And we got to the point where we've divided, everybody now. You're either, the minute you have any conversation around that, you're put over in the penalty box as a naysayer and a negative person and all the rest, unless you're rah, rah, rah behind everything over here. And somewhere in the middle is probably the right answer, but we'll never arrive if we don't have the conversation. I don't think the conversation's been had. And that's a real travesty, and it makes it a lot more difficult now to do. I'm just going to say that it's very difficult for industry to take that position today. The train's left the station, and you would be bringing all kinds of negative notoriety, especially if you're publicly traded, to any company. And it's too bad that it happened that way, but nevertheless, that's where we find ourselves today.